Every experiencer has to overcome ontological shock, and we have to do it while the world tells us we're crazy. Because of this, each of us has our own story, our own helpful perspective, our own set of tools. These are the stories we share in the Experiencer Workshop.
All right. So, I've been sitting here for maybe the past 15, 20 minutes. What am I going to talk about? And finally, I just decided to hit the record button and just start talking. And I think, it's important to address coming out on top with this thing. And, how can we not only persevere, but triumph and come out, on winning on the other end of this thing. And because it feels like we're in a constant state of losing, right? Or that we're becoming something that we don't want to be, or that we're trying to be transformed into some other thing that is against, what our desires or where our heart is actually set. And, one of the main things that I've actually really come to terms with, going through this for as long as I have, is that the experience itself, right? The voices, even the anomalous activity that has happened along with it, it didn't really ever have any essence of its own, right? It was always some sort of empty, autonomous thing that was entirely subjected to my own explanations. Okay. So, meaning it's unidentifiable, and it would always assume the role of whatever I thought it would be, or whatever I thought it was. And I mean, what's crazy about this thing is that even when you don't give it an identity on your own, it will offer one up. It'll just start, throwing names out there. Rasputin, Space Force, Rumpelstiltskin, people that I went to high school with. It's like automated association that your brain does, when they start doing this crap. And what your brain is doing is it's looking for dots to connect, right? It's like, okay, it's saying this thing, and where does that make a connection? And then you just run off with some, storyline or narrative that never goes anywhere, right? It's always some dead end. So the voices themselves and the experience itself, it really relies solely on our long-term memory and the associations that we make with it, right? So in that sense, it's empty without us, right? It really needs us to give it some sort of meaning and definition and structure and substance. Because without that, it doesn't have anything. It needs a role, it needs a character, it needs a storyline, it needs a plot, it needs a narrative, it needs an identity, it needs labels, it needs imagery, it needs all these things that we humans are capable of doing, this creative aspect of our mind where we have this storytelling ability. It needs that. It requires that to have some sort of an association, because the entire thing operates off of association and insinuation and implication. Okay. So, and I've noticed that pattern habitually. That's a habitual pattern throughout this whole experience, is that everything is just an insinuation with no depth or meaning whatsoever. And then if you're not careful, if you're really not careful, when you come to that realization that, the phenomenon itself is void of any essence of its own, and it has already associated itself with all of your long-term memory, well, then you begin to question the essence of your own life experience so far. How far back, does this essence go? Or does this emptiness go? Sorry. And that can be depressing if you're not watching yourself. And, it's my belief that this happens with a lot of people, and this triggers psychosis within them. And then you have, sort of an existential crisis where nothing makes sense all of a sudden, and your life has no meaning. And the things that you once clung to for meaning and purpose no longer have that meaning, right? But if you can treat this experience in the same way that, have you ever seen somebody panning for gold, right? They kind of take that pan and they stick it in the water and they bring it up and they're sifting it around, and you can't really see the gold in there yet. It's just like murky sand and maybe some clear water sitting on top. And then they keep doing it and they keep doing it and they shake it around and shake it around. And then when they do this enough, what's left is the little gold flakes and sometimes little nuggets. And that's very similar, to how this thing plays out. It's like a big sifting process, right? So the associations that it makes, and I'm sure a lot of people have noticed, is that it's always doing this sort of recall in your past where it's bringing up past trauma and past guilt and past shame and embarrassment and regret and remorse at the most awkward times, and in the most just obscure and inconvenient times, right? They make absolutely no sense. Like you're just sitting there or standing there washing the dishes, and all of a sudden you're thinking about, some stupid thing you did when you were in college or high school, or, it's one drunken night when you did something you shouldn't have done. And you're like, whoa, like where did, and then you feel a certain way about that. And it's been very important for me to refer to those moments as just teaching lessons, right? Something that I learned from and something that I grew from. And without it, I wouldn't be who I am today, right? And without learning from it, I wouldn't be who I am today. And, a field of fertilizer will always be entirely comprised of shit, right? Until you grow crops, okay? And I feel like my entire life was like I was just cultivating fertilizer, like a lot of fertilizer, like a lot of just shitty memories and shitty actions and behaviors and criminal records and relationships, like one damaging thing after the next. And I wasn't really blossoming. Like I wasn't coming into my own and learning how to be the best version of me that I can possibly be, And one of those things is really learning how to let go of that old stuff, even if it's brought up and thrown in your face, thank you for the experience. I don't live there anymore. That's not my home. This is where I am currently now. And then when you can actually begin to use the suffering to help other people or to teach lessons or to help somebody else that is currently also in that state of suffering, then it has value, right? Now it's not even suffering anymore. Now what you've gone through in your life actually has value. But as long as I remained stuck in it, it was just shit, and I was never able to actually bring it into something of worth and of value. So, I'm going to keep this one relatively short today and really just teaching people how to try and learn how to let go of things, and I made a post over a year ago. And I told the story about how they catch monkeys in India, right? So to catch a monkey in India, what they do is they take a coconut and they drill 2 holes in the coconut. They drill one in the bottom and then they drill one in the top that's about yay big. And the one in the bottom is about that big. And what they do is they take the coconut and they stake it into the ground, and then they fill the coconut up with like little candies and little treats. And then the monkey comes by and he sees the candy, and he puts his hand inside and he gets a fistful of the candy, but he can't get his fist out because now he's got a fistful of candy. And it reminds me of an episode of The Simpsons where Homer Simpson got his hand stuck up in the vending machine and they had to call the fire department in, and all he had to do was I think it was a jelly donut. And all he had to do was let go of the jelly donut and he could have gotten his hand out. It's the same exact thing. The monkey will hold on to the candy to the point where to the point where the monkey hunter comes over and just whacks it in the head and throws it into a cage. And all it has to do is just let go, but it can't let go. Like it's so fixated on holding on to this thing that it believes it needs. And it doesn't need it. And it'll hold on to it to the point of captivity or even death. So, and the same concept applies. A lot of times we hold on to traumas and even drama, right? I think I went through a phase of my life where I was very addicted to drama, and I still find myself getting sucked into current news and everything like that. I just, it does something to the brain. And just learning how to let go, learning how to let go of all that. And there's a fascinating part about that story that you know that has always like struck a chord with me, is the fact that to the monkey, right, he doesn't even really know what he's holding on to, right? So the monkey's holding on to candy that he believes is delicious and sweet and nutritious, but for all the monkey knows, the candy's laced with rat poison or something like that. So essentially what the monkey is holding on to is a belief. It's holding on to a belief that what is in its hands has enough nutrition and nourishment and enticement and sensual pleasure that it's worth, you know, being killed or being, you know, thrown in jail. And so essentially what it's doing is it's holding on to an illusion, right? It's holding on to an illusion. And this experience that we've come in contact with is, you know, it's all illusion. Really, you're dealing with something that it needs you to be seen as something, right? Because in and of itself, it is nothing until you say it is something. But without you saying it's something, it has no value, right? So it's really more or less just an agreed upon concept. And that is by definition an illusion. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, what we're facing or what's happening with our minds is itself an illusion. I'm saying the operation behind it is an illusion. The mechanism behind it, the mechanics behind it, the way that it operates as an illusion. It really does. It only has as much depth and as much character as you give to it, or as much as you believe offered to you. All right. So if it offers an explanation, you know, and then you buy it, usually you'll get mocked, right, for believing it in the first place. And then you're left feeling stupid and, you know, but it'll run through all of these different, you know, it really is a very trickster clown sort of, you know, sort of phenomenon that we face. But, you know, in that same sense, but if you can learn to devalue, you know, the things in your life that you gave value that were holding you back, you know, you can move forward from this thing. Just let it take it, right? Like let it gobble that up and then say, you know, F off. I remember I went through a phase and I still do. I still find myself going through this. Like if the voices will get, you know, like I said in the last video, it's a very wax and wane cycle for me. And it just went through a wax period. And every time it goes through a waxing period, it's way less, you know, than the last period. Right. So it's like kind of evening. It's, you know, it's actually like slowly subsiding. So like I went through, I'd say for the first year, it was almost like a primer. Like I was getting lubed up to, you know, just get really hammered by this thing. It was like going to the gas pumps, you know, and then one week it's like $3 a gallon and you're like, oh man, that really sucks. And then you go the week after that and it's like $3.25 and you're like, oh, what the hell? They're robbing me. But then you go back a week later and it's only like $3.10 and you're like, oh, thanks for the relief. But then you go back a week later and it's like $3.35. You're like, oh, what the? And each time you go back, there's like this up and down of inflation that slowly acclimates you to just getting raped at the gas pump as the weeks and months go on. And that's what this thing was really like. It just went up and up and up and up and up, you know, just enough so like to the point where like I wouldn't completely lose my shit and kill somebody or kill myself. And now it's doing that, but going back down, you know, so that's probably the best way to put it. And, you know, being left with the gold nuggets afterwards. Really, that's the best way to put it. So learn on the way up, set the intention to maintain yourself all the way up. You know, express anger in a healthy, non-toxic manner that is non-harmful to other people or yourself or property around you. And eventually it does subside and it does recede. And then what is left is this, you know, this part of you that has faced itself. Really, you know, it's really, it winds up becoming you facing yourself at the end of all of it, looking back. Right. I don't know exactly what this thing was, but it represented an illusion. It represented the fearful nature of the world, of samsara. Like I refer to it a lot as samsara's mouthpiece. And it just, it was a representative of suffering. It was a representative of the cries of the collective unconscious. It really was. Forced me to face that, forced me to accept that, almost like it was karmic residue, not just my karma, like in an immense amount of karma. I mean, according to Buddhist scripture, we only face our own karma, but it did feel like, I'm sure anybody can relate. It feels like I'm taking on the entire world's karma here. It's entirely unorthodox and inhumane, and but yeah, there, the best thing that I can say is that it does get better, it does subside, it does recede, and what you're left with is the best parts of you that you decided to keep after facing the fearful aspects of yourself. And that really is the best thing that I can say right now. All right, so that's it for this week, and all right, take care, guys.